Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Call to order the meeting of Tuesday, March 27, 2012 at 9:02 a.m. We will begin with the flag salute led today by me. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I will ask our clerk of the board, Ann Holman, to read the statement of meeting procedures.
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of March 27th, 2012. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there is a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all pagers and cell phones be either turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you. Now is the time for public comments. Anyone may address the board on items not on this agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, since the time allocated for public comment is 15 minutes. If all public comments cannot be heard within the 15-minute time limit, we will take public comments up again at the end of today's agenda. The board is not permitted to take any action on any items addressed under public comment, but now is the time for public comment if anyone would like to come forward with anything not on today's agenda.
Good morning, members of the board, county staff. My name is Dave Hinshaw. I am PG&E's account manager for Placer County. And I am here today to acknowledge the county's continued efforts in energy efficiency and energy cost reduction. Over the last few years, we've had what we call an integrated approach here with the county, which really is a fancy name for a combination of programs. And my role has been to bring these programs to the county, which has included solar, rate analysis. We've looked at all your accounts over the last couple of years and made appropriate rate adjustments. We're looking at some off-peak programs to use power during the lower cost hours, as well as our energy efficiency programs. And speaking of energy efficiency, since 2007, the county has seen an 18% reduction in energy use. This represents 3 million kilowatt hours annually, which at today's energy prices is roughly around $450,000 a year in energy savings. That represents around 440 homes usage for a year and 120 cars off the road. Currently, we have over a dozen projects underway with the county representing another 700,000 kilowatt hours in annual savings. Lighting, boilers, controls, and some plug load sensors are a few of the projects we've got going on, and we're looking at approximately $75,000 in energy savings and incentives. I'd like to acknowledge the outstanding relationship and I see partnership with the county. I'd like to recognize the facility service staff, Mr. Durfee, Mr. Swift. Special thanks to Mr. Steve Heckert for all the work that he's been doing as well, and also to Jim Doolittle, who's the county's energy consultant. And with that, I'd like to ask Joel to say a few words as well.
Good morning. Joel Swift, Deputy Director. And just to follow on what Dave had to say, the incentives, the rebates are through our energy block grant, which I look back, went back to 2009. And it's not often that we want to come up here and say we're late on a project, but we're actually a little bit behind. Because of that, we've actually had a lot of savings, and we're actually be able to add 2 more buildings. So we started with 30 buildings. We're actually doing 32 buildings on this program. The grant is about $600,000. Total project is about $933,000. And just to remind your board, it's been a unique grant because the DOE pays for purchase of equipment and installation only by our staff. So I think we should all be proud of your building maintenance staff, the crafts mechanics, electricians, and HVAC staff who've done a fantastic job installing this, keeping the budget down. And as Dave mentioned, because of that, it's helped us reduce our energy costs. So I do want to thank Dave. He really is correct. This has been a real collaborative effort, and we look forward to continuing those efforts to keep our energy costs down. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joel. Dave, thank you very much. Really appreciate the news. It's always good to hear good news, and we really appreciate all the outreach from PG&E to help us achieve our goals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board for Supervisors Committee reports. Any committee reports? I see no lights. I do have one thing that I wanted to mention. On February 21st, we participated in the Auburn Folsom Natoma Managing Partner Agreement signing at the Canyon View Community Center here in Auburn. And the Bureau of Reclamation and California Department of Parks and Recreation have provided us with a copy of the document that we all signed that day. I have it here, and we'll put it out for public display. This was to celebrate the funding for 25 years moving forward between Bureau of Reclamation and state parks. But I think it's important to note that there were a lot of people involved in this effort. Congressman McClintock's office, Dan Lundgren's office, Doris Matsui's office, Ted Gaines, Doug LaMalfa, Ruth Coleman from Parks, California State Parks, Don Glazer from Reclamation, Scott Nakaji from Reclamation. I signed on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, Mike Holmes, City of Auburn, the City of Folsom, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the Army Corps of Engineers were all signatories up here. And then participants who worked with us for this terrific achievement, including people from, let's see, who do we have here? Canyon Keepers, CAL FIRE, Western States Trail Foundation, Protect American River Canyons. A lot of folks were part of this. A lot of folks signed this. So I'll make sure this goes up in a public place so people can have the opportunity to have a look at it, because it truly is a great example of government working with private partners to achieve a goal near and dear to all of us. And I just really wanted to call out what a terrific job that was. And seeing no other supervisor committee reports, we will now move to consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda have been recommended for approval by County Executive Department. All items will be approved by a single roll call vote. However, anyone may ask to address any consent agenda and may ask to have that item moved for discussion. So at this time, is there anyone who would like to have it moved? That would be Holly.
Yes, actually, I would just like to make a correction on item 17A. There's a typo. It identifies for an amount of $102,150. The full amount of the contract with that change would actually be $112,150.
Thank you
it's
for that.
It's correct in the memorandum.
Thank you for that correction. Anything else? Any other corrections, changes? All right, do I have a motion? Oh, no, this is a roll call. Anyone in the public? No, we're good.
Second.
Holmes? Yes. Duran? Yes. Wygant? Yes. Euler? Montgomery?
Yes. Okay, at this time we will move on to our first departmental item. This will be item 5A, 5.1, Auditor Controller, County-wide Audit Services, Agreed Upon Procedures, Redevelopment Agencies, items 1 and 2. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairwoman Montgomery, members of the Board of Supervisors, Andy Sisk, Assistant Auditor Controller, here on behalf of our Auditor Controller, Kathy Martinez. First, I'll speak to item number 1, which is to exercise option year number 1 for our audit contract with Macias, Genie, and O'Connell, and authorizing the Auditor Controller to sign said contract. At our Audit Committee meeting back in early January, the Auditor Controller informed the Audit Committee that we were recommending to exercise the option year for Macias, Genie, and O'Connell, but that we also needed to reach out to all the parties to this agreement. As many of you may recall, we have a number of other audits that are performed under this audit contract, and so we reached out to members of management at the Flood Control District, the Tahoe Area Regional Transit, the Golden Sierra Job Training Agency, the Treasurer's Department, First 5 Placer, the Redevelopment Agency, Western Placer Waste Management Authority, and the Air Pollution Control District. And all parties agreed that we should continue with Macias, Genie, and O'Connell and exercise option year number 1. With that said, I would recommend that the board allow the Auditor Controller to sign that contract and we move forward exercising that option year. With that, I can move to item number 2, or we can talk about item number 1 to see if you have any questions related to the audit contract.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, actually, I just had a comment, and thank you very much for conveying that information. Having sit on the audit committee for the last year, I'm very pleased with the firm that we have, looking over our business. I did want to point out that in the RFP that they provided, that it does, some people that go through it may be shocked at the high rate for the top senior partner, which is, in excess of $190 an hour. But it looks like that 98% or 95% of the work is going to be conducted at the $158 level, for most of the services that are going to be provided. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
I don't see any other comments or questions from the board, so move on to 2.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is actually a little more interesting. It's not the norm, I should say. As many of you are aware, the state of California, in its infinite wisdom, decided to dissolve the redevelopment agencies. That came down by the Supreme Court at the end of December. As a result of that, the Auditor Controller has a number of things to do, but one of which is cited in Health and Safety Code Section 34182, which says that the Auditor Controller shall cause to be performed agreed-upon procedures audits. And right there, we had some trouble with the wording. When I say we, Auditor Controllers had trouble with that wording because agreed-upon procedures and audits are 2 different things. Agreed-upon procedures follow the attestation standards. Audits follow auditing standards. So at the end of the day, when you do work in accordance with attestation standards, you're not going to get an opinion on compliance. You're not going to get an opinion on the financial surety that things are fairly stated. Where, on the other hand, when you're doing an audit, you do get an opinion on compliance. You do get an opinion on your financial statements. So there's a big difference. The thing that you will see is there will be consistency statewide. The procedures that have been agreed to by the state controller, the Department of Finance, the Legislative Analyst Office was involved, as well as the California Society of CPAs. Many parties had a hand in this. And at the end of the day, the statewide all the auditor controllers statewide will all be performing similar procedures. There is some leeway for other auditor controllers to add more procedures to this, and that was something a couple of the larger counties wanted. We at Placer County are not planning to add any more procedures than what is specified there in the engagement letter and what has been approved by the state. So with that, we would ask that you approve this contract. We move forward. The timeline is very expeditious. The firm has guaranteed that they will get all this work done and committed to meeting the deadline of July 1 to the state controller. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Supervisor Duran.
No, I just think that you hit upon one of the perhaps the most important pieces to this whole redevelopment issue, is that whoever is writing the law doesn't really know and it doesn't understand what's going on between an audit and agreed upon procedures. Having overseen both, it's quite ironic that they're trying to use the term audit with agreed upon procedures, just like you said. So
yes.
And without sounding too political, I think the confusion about the language relating to redevelopment and its dissolution extends beyond that, but I will leave it at that. Any members of the audience have any questions, concerns about either of these items? Seeing none? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move on to County Executive. Item number 6, Budget and Financial Strategy. Graham Knaus presenting.
Good morning. Graham Knaus, Finance and Budget Operations Manager, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit differently about the budget than what we've done over the past several months. This morning we're going to talk about some budget strategy, take a look at revenue and expenditure trends, both in terms of the history and also in terms of where we may be headed. We'll talk about the budget and financial policy and how that's been implemented over the course of the last several years, touch on fiscal and policy challenges, and then look ahead. And I'm going to go through this relatively briskly. Don't hesitate to stop at any point. This is the per capita revenue chart. You've seen this before. This has actuals through 2010-11, and we will be, again, updating this once we get to the August budget workshops with the 2011-12 related information once completed. The key related to this is that certainly there have been ups and downs over the course of history. On the whole, our revenues are lower than what they were back in 1978 as adjusted by inflation. And the key one is actually the second line there on the chart related to taxes. And on that point, property tax is the largest discretionary revenue source in the county. In fact, nearly 3 out of every 4 discretionary dollars come directly from property taxes. And this, if anything, highlights what has occurred over the course of the last several years related to the economic downturn. It's this chart right here. You can see in 2008-9, as the decline really hit, the significant drops that followed related to the county property tax related revenue in each of the subsequent years. The good note related to this is that the amount of the decrease has come down substantially, and we're hopeful that by the time we get to 13-14, it's actually flat, and then we can start thinking about what we do going forward. So what's the story related to revenues? Overall, revenues on a per capita basis have dropped more than 7% since 2007-8 as adjusted by inflation, and now have dropped 8% since 1978. There has been the phased use of reserves, as your board knows well, over 2008-9, 9-10, and 10-11. We steered away from that in 11-12, and for what's been pulled together related to the 12-13 budget. There's also been some reprioritization of general fund related to critical and mandated services. And so as significant department revenues were dropping, they were partially offset with some levels of reprioritization in order to meet mandated services and some of the board priorities. That was occurring at the very time that the overall discretionary general fund was going down. And as such, in the area of public safety, their share of the overall discretionary general fund rose from 35 to 48% during that period of time. And in HHS, it also rose from 13 to 20%, both from a combination of the general fund being reprioritized to those areas, and also just the size of the pie has shrunk. So on the expenditure side, here's the historical look going back to 1978 in the changes there. You can see this broken down by functional area relative to the health and public assistance, public protection and general government, and the other functions as well. We'll touch on some of the cost pressures and what their impacts may be as we work through this. So on the whole, related to expenditures, they have come down. They've come down since 2007-8, effectively to the degree of $47 million. That's 6%. And when we look at 8-9, there's been a $120 million drop since that time relative to the budget. The big jump from year to year is primarily a function of infrastructure-related projects and the timing of those in 2008-9. Per capita expenditures have dropped 10.7% since 2007-8 as adjusted by inflation, and going back to 1978 have dropped a little more than 2%. There's certainly been a greater focus related to cost savings, related efficiencies, and proposals, and exploration of alternative service delivery models, a number of which your board has put in place over the past several years. In addition, there's been increased employee cost sharing related to health and pensions. Bottom line related to the economic downturn is that this county has been far more prepared than many other agencies. That certainly doesn't mean it hasn't been difficult given the prolonged nature of the decline. And it's the long-term approach that this board has put in place for years related to the county financial policies going all the way back to 2003 that has really allowed a far smoother work through the decline. So in terms of pulling the revenues and expenditures together, the balance of them began to change back in 2008. And you can see here that as we worked through the economic decline, that gap grew larger. And one question would be, well, how have we managed through that growing gap? It's the use of one-time solutions that has partially related to the use of reserves and other one-time related solutions and reprioritization of revenues that has allowed the budget to continue to be balanced and to allow the board to prioritize towards core priorities to the greatest degree possible. Certainly, the use of one-time solutions is not sustainable indefinitely, and it has come down considerably over the last couple of years. The budget and financial policy would suggest that we would continue to move forward related to decreasing the use of those one-time solutions. So where we're headed related to expenditures, certainly whether public or private, there are a number of cost of doing business increases that all organizations face in terms of rent, utilities, and transportation, so we'll certainly continue to experience those. Here in Placer County, we also have Measure F, which has a cost driver on the public safety side related to annual salary adjustments. There's pension and specific action that CalPERS just took within the past couple of weeks that will increase the county cost beginning in 2013-14 by $3 million. There could be other pension changes on the horizon, and I think depending upon which day you pick up the paper, it's an absolute yes or it's an absolute no, and it's probably ultimately somewhere in the middle. Health benefit premiums have been squeezing private and public sector budgets for a number of years. We're estimating a 9.5% increase in those premiums effective in January of 2013. And going forward, there'll be some increases that are likely to escalate above the rate of inflation, putting some pressure on the county budget. So on the revenue side, we're certainly not out of the woods, but we are inching closer. We talked about the discretionary general fund potentially getting flat by the time we get to 13-14. There will be some modest annual growth in out years. Certainly not what was experienced during the boom, where there were significant increases in the property tax revenue on a year-over-year basis. And the potential challenge of cost drivers exceeding the annual rate of growth related to revenues. At the same time, some department revenues are beginning to tick up, which suggests the need to balance county-wide revenues with discretionary revenues. The bottom line is that it's about maintaining as sustainable an operation reflective of your board's priorities as possible, while retaining some flexibility related to those priorities that have been put on hold in order to manage through the economic downturn. So to do that, it will require continued strategic fiscal management to balance all those competing priorities. On the budget and financial policy side, there are a couple of overarching principles related to this policies that are relevant. One, reflecting what the revenue and expenditure trends are within the budget. We do that as part of our normal course. Also identifying potential opportunities while also avoiding risks. utilizing one-time revenues for one-time costs to the greatest extent feasible, and using an overall conservative approach to both create some flexibility and opportunities, but also smooth the peaks and the valleys related to countywide operations. The economic downturn has certainly resulted in the change in approach on a number of things. We touched on reserves, also road overlay, capital projects, deferred building maintenance. These are some things that have been reduced or to some extent eliminated over the course of the last several years in order to focus on core operational priorities. There's also been the greater focus related to the cost savings efforts and identifying alternative service delivery models and the employee cost sharing related to health and pensions to ensure sustainable alignment of those revenues and expenditures. So where we sit today, we are faced with a prime strategic opportunity related to positioning the county budget and operations over the next few years. It's about directing revenues across county priorities, but also managing those costs in a way that allows a sustainable long-term county operation. Considering the long-term approach, this opportunity, understanding that we are really in a rebenched economy and our out-year look has been dampened down in terms of the reality that we've lived through over the past several years. And there's an opportunity to strengthen and expand our toolbox to have greater utilization of tools, greater availability of those tools to withstand economic fluctuations that may occur in the future. Fiscal and policy challenges. So we've touched on some of these over the past few months. There are a few new ones to talk about related to today and actually moving forward over the coming weeks and months. The South Placer Adult Correctional Facility, there are options that are currently being developed now that would come back to your board for discussion in June. The District Attorney Crime Lab, we currently have a relationship with the state, and there's some challenges with that relationship now. The department is exploring a multitude of options in terms of partnering with other counties, a regional approach, a go-it-alone approach, just looking through any potential opportunity and structure that could be put in place to ensure that we have access to Crime Lab to work through the normal DA-related functions. Those would come back likely in the August budget workshop timeframe for further discussion. The library has been touched on before related to sustainability of funding and operations. Fire Protective Services has been discussed as well related to the Fire Control Fund and also some of the CSAs, those county service areas related to North Auburn, Ophir Fire, and working through challenges in those areas. Those would come back as workshops to your board in the near future. Also, we have infrastructure and deferred maintenance, and this is a far more comprehensive look at infrastructure and deferred maintenance related priorities and challenges as they face the county. Taking stock of what are all the planning documents that are out there, the existing needs, priorities, and what level of available funding there are for things such as capital projects, deferred building maintenance, for public works related projects, road maintenance and overlay, for the information technology strategic plan that was approved by your board at the end of last year, and also recognizing what the impacts are of the redevelopment dissolution to the extent that it was a tool to fund some of these projects. That will come back as a workshop at a future board meeting to work through that sort of umbrella approach related to infrastructure and the priorities associated with that. So looking ahead, there would be the targeted fiscal and policy workshops that I referenced in terms of library, also fire, infrastructure, and that South Placer Adult Correctional Facility. Today we are requesting you to direct staff to develop a multi-year budget and financial strategy for discussion. In terms of thinking about the best way to move forward over the coming years to the extent that we have revenues, modest growth in revenues, hopefully sooner rather than later, but beginning perhaps in the 14-15 year on the general fund side, and earlier in some of the department case of some of the department revenues. That multi-year budget and strategy document to have full implementation of the budget and financial policy over the coming years, to minimize outstanding liabilities, but also balancing operational priorities of the board, certainly prioritizing revenue changes and sustainable levels of discretionary general fund support, and also addressing priorities that have been put on hold over the course of the last several years in order to work through a sustainable operation to the greatest degree possible in terms of within an economic decline. And with that, I actually will stop, open it up for any questions you may have, and certainly request the direction to move forward.
Supervisor Holmes.
Yeah, could you go back to slide number 8, please? It looks like for several years we've had more revenue than expenditures up until the economic downturn. So all that, for a better term, extra money, can someone tell me what we did with all that extra money?
There were dollars that have been set aside as part of the long-term planning efforts of the board, being true to the budget and financial policy, that were set aside in the reserves, for example, to ensure that when we're in a place whereby the revenues start to decline, there's at least some way to mitigate through that. In addition, there were dollars that were set aside for specific operational priorities of the board to fund some of the capital project priorities as well, to work through those, to work through the costs related to that as well. So it was planning on a multitude of levels related to both meeting those budget and financial policies and also funding infrastructure and the capital projects related priorities of the board when those dollars were available to do so.
For example, some of the new buildings that were built, some of that money went towards the new buildings.
Yes, absolutely.
And we put some of that aside as well for our other post-employment retirement benefits.
That is correct.
And so when everything changed and now we have more expenditures than revenues, we've been able to balance the budget because we have carryover that is, so that there's no extra money, it's just money that helps to balance our budget. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
So which is the difference between the core operational model or operations of the county and what is needed in order to ensure a sustainable long-term operation while recognizing some priorities that fall outside of this chart. For example, infrastructure-related costs, which are not reflected in this line.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Graham, I don't see any other lights, so I'll ask a couple of questions. On this same chart, this is through 10/11. Do we have, or can we see at some point in the next month, couple of months, our projection for this continued line? I think it would be very useful for us to have that as part of the discussion as to moving forward, as how do we prioritize the things we know we need to do with the dollars we may or may not have.
If I could just add one thing there to your point. Typically what we do is we come back when we have the fund balance and provide that modeling to the board. And it's really a short-term 3 to 5 year, and then we do a longer-term projection. And really, it's in the last few years especially, there's been some constant adjustments to that, reflecting current economic conditions and what we have set aside for certain types of operations. So we'd certainly bring that back, and I think it will be fundamental to our strategy to getting back to our financial policies and balancing under this really a new condition, or this new benchmarking that we're at.
Jennifer, if I could just jump in on this topic. I don't recall, you may have done it, but if you could take that concept and actually plug it into this model in this particular graph, I don't know if that's kind of what you're thinking, but if you do that going out like 5 years or so, that would really be fascinating to ponder.
Absolutely. Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, no, I was just going to make a comment. I would really encourage us to take this viewpoint in the future. You know, I've got, just like I do in my professional life, you know, I've got certain goals that I want to accomplish, you know, and you set out a plan. You've got to, you know, pay for your groceries and, you know, a roof over your head and your operating expenses and whatever else you do. And there's other things that may come up in the future. And it's real important, in order for me to get in the end zone, so to speak, is to have all of that planned out for the most part. So, you know, I think it's a very prudent thing that we could do to take a look at the future and kind of plan for these kinds of things. So,
Could you go to slide number 10? I had a question. Under pension, you say $3 million additional cost across all funds beginning fiscal year 13-14. That's each year?
Yes.
Or is that a one-time expense?
No, that's each year.
Each
So
year. That's
what-
what I thought, and I just wanted to really confirm that. So
What-
it's not a one-time expense that just goes away. It's a continued expense that moves forward with us into the future.
That's right. When calculating what the impact is on counties in terms of the amount of money that needs to be put in to fund the pension, CalPERS calculates they estimate what's called the discount rate. That's the expected investment return that would occur. Prior to March 14th, that was 7.75% expected annual investment return each year over the course of the liability. What they did March 14th is reduce that investment return estimate to 7.5%. And that's what triggers the $3 million. So until such time as they change the investment return again, whether up or down, it would be an ongoing cost that we would incur across all of our county funds, of which a portion of that would be general fund. In the neighborhood of half of that would be general fund.
Okay. Slide number 11. One of your bullet points is some department revenues are headed up. Can you identify what those departments might be?
Certainly. This is actually good news. I wish.
That's why I wanted to point it
Yeah,
out.
no, it's good to focus on the good news every now and then. There are some revenues that are going up, primarily those related to sales tax, and that which impacts the public safety sales tax within the public safety fund. So that would be the sheriff's department, probation, and the district attorney, and also health and human services, which has some of the realignment revenue, both from the 1991 realignment and also the new one linked to sales tax. So it's those two areas where there's been some revenue growth that's occurring. On the discretionary general fund side, the amount of sales tax that the county gets is relatively small. So although there's been some increase there as well, it's nowhere near what it would take in order to offset the declines on the property tax side.
Thank you. Slide number 13. Sorry to be so painful and go through these so much. Strengthen and expand toolbox to respond to future economic fluctuations. What do you mean by that? What are some examples?
We have, within the budget and financial policy, there's discussions about setting dollars aside related to the reserve. So that would certainly be part of the toolbox. There's discussions, language related to the use of one-time funding for one-time costs, as opposed to using that for an ongoing cost. Certainly, that's another piece that goes in the toolbox. The approach to revenue growth that may occur, to the extent that there are differences among competing priorities within the county, relative to revenues, there's in anything that has a general fund support component to it today, the way in which the board prioritizes how that general fund is distributed over the course of the next several years can afford additional flexibility in out years. To the extent that the dollars are not all of the dollars that are coming in the door are being used for an ongoing operational cost, and instead being used for more of a one-time related cost, provides far more flexibility for the board, while you're also meeting some of your board priorities, such as some of the list that we went through related to infrastructure, and it could be a whole host of other related one-time priorities.
Those were all my questions. Supervisor Euler.
Yes, actually, teeing off just precisely on that point, I'd be very curious to see utilizing your office and our folks in economic development, kind of do an inventory utilizing the existing knowledge base in our area, whether it's SACTO or any of the other organizations, SARTA, that are dedicated to economic development in the Sacramento region. How we can utilize, number one, our relatively strong position in terms of our stability as a local government, not just in the state but in our region. We've distinguished ourselves there, that while other local governments in our area, Sac County as one, are facing substantial layoffs, particularly in the area of public protection. How we can emphasize our stability based on the steps we've already taken, and then enhance that by saying, okay, where we have the opportunity to spend one-time dollars or capital improvement dollars, what are the most effective expenditures in terms of creating a multiplier for private sector investment? How can we capitalize on the foundation that we have by virtue of the decisions we've already made, by making some expenditure decisions, be it in infrastructure, what have you, to really encourage private development to come in to help grow our primary revenue stream, and that is that assessed valuation, that property tax assessed valuation. What steps can we take today in that one-time expenditure mode that will kind of turn the light on for private sector investors elsewhere in this state? I mean, obviously, we have to we have to play the hand we're dealt being in California, being one of California's 58 counties. But for those businesses that have that might be looking to either grow, relocate, start in California and aren't looking at the other 49 states, but are still looking at California, how can we further distinguish ourselves as the place that private sector should be looking to put their investment dollars? What steps can we take? What statements can we make by virtue of our own investment in our infrastructure that encourages that private sector investment that grows that bottom line that is 3/4 of every discretionary dollar that we have? That's where I'd like to really see us. Now that I think we all kind of agree, all right, though we're not growing out of anything yet, we've kind of stabilized, we kind of feel like there's a little bit of a floor beneath us. Mm-hmm. And as we look to the future, where can we strategically invest that drives that private sector investment?
So can I spin this back and you can tell
please.
me if this is what you're thinking? So it would be a bit of a research endeavor related to connecting with some of the economic development folks, both here and more broadly, to have a more focused strategic approach related to how we would utilize one-time dollars to maximize what the impact would be on the community as a whole related to property tax assessment. So we're basically getting more bang for the buck as we're spending our resources.
And what I'm saying is that there is a tremendous knowledge base. This work has been done. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. I think it's a function of locating the reports that have already been written by the Robert Fountains of the world. And again, picking up the phone, calling Barbara Hayes at SACTO and finding out from her what are the things that you're hearing from businesses are important as they're looking to either expand an existing business, find a new location, start a new business, whatever the case may be. I don't think we need to go out and spend time and money doing reports. I think a little bit of staff time might be needed to coalesce some of the information that already exists to say these are the kinds of things that we're hearing. I know the California Chamber of Commerce does the same kind of thing when they do their business surveys. So I think there's a wealth of knowledge out there. I think it would be helpful to this board to get some kind of guidance back that says that we know that California businesses are looking for the following kinds of things. They have this level of pain threshold in terms of amount of money that they're willing to put in up front by virtue of fees or, impact fees, what have you. If we spent this money to reduce that threshold, we anticipate this much private sector investment would be looking to relocate to our area. And just strategically start to think about how we can grow that, our number one revenue stream. How can we spend our dollars today to grow our number one revenue stream, that is that assessed valuation, knowing that the real estate market, primarily the residential real estate market, which is what drove us for the first half of the first decade, that's not going to be doing it on its own for a little while. And so if we want to get back to a point where we're actually growing that primary revenue stream, what strategic investment can we make that encourages those private sector dollars?
I see no other questions.
Thank you.
We had some other charts. Were you going to finish up with those?
No, what I would request of your board is to direct staff actually to go through this process, in terms of developing that budget and financial strategy that touches on how we emerge from the economic decline over the course of the next several years, fully implement that budget and financial policy, identify where those strategic opportunities may be in terms of targeted revenues, targeted use of dollars that are available on a one-time and on an ongoing basis.
Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, I would be really interested in seeing the kind of the outline, as before the product is, rolled out, what the nuts and bolts are.
Certainly.
All right? Thank you.
I see no other lights. Anyone in the audience want to comment on this? All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point we will move to, I think we'll finish with item 6, county executive, do other post-employment benefits, and then we'll move to our first timed item. Therese Leonard presenting. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Therese Leonard with the County Executive Office. I'm here to talk to you today about other post-employment benefits, also referred to as OPEB, and particularly focus on the new employee hire charge. Retiree health benefits are the number one cost driver for post-employment benefits. And ideally, retirement benefits are paid for during the employment of an employee. Essentially, it's an exchange of employee services for promised future benefits. So as such, when the benefits are actually paid out, they were already earned in a previous period of time. Unlike pension funds, other post-employment benefits were not recognized on the financial reports of government agencies up until recently, within the last 5 years or so. And because they are now being recognized, they have become a very focal public talking point, essentially. In January of 2012, I presented to your board both the pension and the other post-employment actuarial reports. At that time, the other post-employment benefit liability was about $313 million, and the unfunded liability associated with it was $195.8 million. Key to managing through this benefit is a policy that was originally adopted by the board back in 2006 and later affirmed in 2010. The policy's goal, probably the number one goal, is to have the county be in compliance with Government Accounting Standards Board Statement number 45, which tells us how we have to recognize the benefit. But in addition to that, it goes a step further, and essentially it directs the county executive office in how the board wants to fund this obligation into the future. Pension obligations have been being funded by agencies for years, for decades, essentially. And at the time of the report, our fund was about 75% funded. It was $1 billion liability, but it had about $750-something million in assets toward it. Unlike that, the other post-employment benefits is relatively new in being recognized, and so there's sort of a catch-up strategy that the accounting standards allow agencies to use. And essentially, it's a 30-year amortization of the liability as of a point in time, and then a recognition of what's being earned in that current year moving forward. So the policy as adopted takes advantage of a couple of things. It says we are going to put these funds, as we collect them, into an irrevocable trust. What that allows us to do is use the highest discount rate possible. You heard Graham allude to the pension discount rate that's been changed to 7.5%. We can use as high as 7.61% for this trust to value the investment returns on this asset. It's a long-term earning potential. The higher the risk, you essentially match up with a long-term strategy. The other thing that the policy does is it allows us to collect these funds through a payroll process. And every year what we do is we assess how much do we have to pay into the trust in order to be compliant with the standard, and then we distribute it over the number of employees that we have. In 2012-13, that annual figure per employee is $7,012. It's a rather high number, especially if you're looking at a lower wage earner. But it's in order to get the benefit in place and funded by the time the employee actually goes to retire. I should note that the actuarials are based on a whole lot of assumptions. One of the assumptions being that if you're a miscellaneous employee, you're going to retire somewhere around the age of 58. If you retire sooner, there is an impact on the next report that's done. So what I guess I'm saying is that it's point in time. It looks only at your current workforce and your current retiree base. It does not factor in future hires as we're looking at them. To that end, the board actually adopted another piece of the policy, and that is to fund, or advance fund, if you will, the recognized liability for a new employee at 50%. Some good news with the new report is that the amount that we would need to pre-fund, again, it's only 50% of the liability that we think would be associated with that employee, has been reduced from the current $50,000 to $37,000. And that's literally just a calculation done off of the new actuarial report. What I should note here is that this charge is factored in as we develop the proposed budget. As Graham just alluded to, there are a whole host of competing priorities that the board thinks about as they're going through the budget process. Infrastructure, road overlay, increased operating costs due to cost drivers for labor, a whole host of different things are factored in. And so this is also a consideration. Through the budget process, departments evaluate how many new employees they're going to need to bring in. It's analyzed in the executive office, and as part of the funding recognition for the new hire charge, the board directs a certain amount of money. So this year in the current budget is about $2 million that's specifically been set aside for new hire charges. We look at what new revenues are coming in that could help offset the cost of the new charge. We also look at and project how much fund balance carryover might be available to also help fund this new hire charge. So a whole host of different methodologies are considered when we look at how many new employees we bring in and how we're going to fund this charge. In good economic times, as Supervisor Holmes alluded to, the board has actually proactively set aside millions of dollars to help fund this liability. Mostly because we weren't able to do it in previous times, we actually are sort of trying to catch up. Over $25 million of general fund was set aside over 3 different budget years when we had good economic times. We had excess carryover and were able to fund. So that is essentially what we would ask of you if we were still in good economic times. However, we haven't been there. And so the board has not put these extra dollars against OPEB for a number of years. So having said that, the board directed at the January presentation that we reconvene the Finance Committee and look at the new hire OPEB charge. Finance Committee is made up of the Auditor Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector, and County Executive Office staff, and is also has counsel from County Counsel that helps direct and make sure we're legal and in compliance. So essentially, the Finance Committee looked at 3 different alternatives. One of them is, okay, if we follow the current OPEB policy for new hires, what does that do over the next few years? If we look at the new hire charge and phase it in over a 2-year process, how would that impact our actuarial reports out into the future? And the third option that we looked at is we do not charge a new hire charge. We simply adhere to the accounting standard premise of funding the ARC. And again, that's an accounting standard. It is not necessarily a funding policy. In summary of the results, and they are all located on page 137 of your presentation, the actual analysis, and I won't bore you with that, but essentially what we found is some really good news. The board-adopted policy works. Essentially what it does is it does not grow our unfunded liability, which is really what the goal was. There's 2 goals with the policy in addition to the funding. One is to, at some point in time, be able to pay retiree health premiums out of this trust. We do not do that now. Those costs right now are about $11.5 to $12 million. They are expected to double over the next decade. So we really want to get to a point where we can pay those costs out of the trust. The second goal was to not grow the unfunded liability. Because the actuary is telling you this is only point in time, as you bring new people in, you could potentially grow your liability. And so by funding 50% of the new hire charge, you essentially negate that. So we have been successful in that. The modeling does show that. With regard to the phase-in of the new hire charge, there really is very little difference in the actuarial premise on that. The one caution that I would give is if the board chose to go to a 2-year phase-in for the new hire charge, is to be very focused on it. Maybe not do it across the board, just do it in areas that are necessary. The other consideration is because it is considered during the development of the proposed budget, it may or may not be necessary. So for instance, in the 12-13 budget, we have factored in enough new hire OPEB charges to pay for what we see as coming in new employees. In 13-14, when we see the big ballooning of, in public safety predominantly, new hire charges, we're looking at, in the modeling, about 168 folks coming in. It's about a $6 million cost. That could be factored into the 13-14 budget development. But those are some things to consider as the board wants to move forward. So in closing, I would just say that the board has heard through Graham that we have a number of challenges facing us over the next few years, predominantly the opening of the South County Jail and the costs associated with that, restoration of reserves in order to weather another economic downturn that could occur within the decade that we're going into. Road overlay, we've sort of had to push back on funding that. We're getting to a point where we're not going to be able to use other kinds of funds to fund the road overlay program, so we might want to consider putting more money into those types of investments, if you will. So with that, I would just close and say we could do a phase-in of the new hire charge. If the board would like to do that, we would need to amend the policy. It could be long-term, it could be short-term, but it is certainly at your discretion.
Supervisor Duran.
Yes, thank you very much, Therese, for this information. And I have a couple of questions, and feel free, Holly, to jump in here, because I'm not really familiar with what the effect, current effect on the upfront payment on departments is, and what a 2-year phase-in would be. What would we do the same? What would occur different? How would it impact departments?
Well, I can tell you that with the current year budget, the 11-12 budget, and the 12-13 budget, the new hire OPEB charges are already included in the proposed budget. So in terms of being able to continue to provide current operations and sustain services, it has no impact because it's already incorporated. To the extent that there might be other priorities of the board that the board would like to consider for funding, perhaps then it could be redirected. So right now, it's fully funded.
Okay. Okay. But in the future, what effect does it have on departments to spread it over 2 years as opposed to paying it up front? And
An example would be what we see is I'm going to call it the blip in hiring that we're going to need to do for public safety. And that would occur in about 13-14. If you spread that charge over a 2-year period, essentially you're taking about a $6 million obligation and cutting it in half, so it's about $3 million per year.
Okay.
The question that comes up is if you don't factor that into that budget, is there really going to be additional funding available to fund it in the second year? Most of the time we fund this new hire charge out of excess carryover fund balance, and so we obligate a one-time revenue or funding mechanism, if you will, to fund a one-time cost, because it's not an ongoing, other than the $7,000 charge. Will that fund balance be available in the second year? If we split it, it's unknown at this time. That will probably be better seen in the modeling that's going to occur, I think, in June or July as we move forward. There are always competing priorities in a department. Having worked in a department, I will tell you, if I could use the money to fund something other than a new hire charge, as a department, I might want to do that. As a policy, as a fiduciary agent, absolutely not. This obligation is ours. We have earned the liability through prior service of our employees, through our retirees. It is our obligation to fund it. So from a fiduciary responsibility, I look at it completely different than I would as a department.
Let me just add to that, and Therese gave a good example of how it may impact or have implications for public safety. But in other departments, there are other types of implications, and it really depends on the department, how they're funded, and what their operations are. I will say that typically what a department might do is delay filling the position so that they have funds available for the next hire. And it has some short-term impacts on the department, but by and large, I would say those departments that are making that contribution and doing that have been able to, you know, frankly, it takes a little bit to hire people anyway, do a recruitment if it's outside, and that's how those new, those charges are provided for. So there are some departments that just cannot meet that, and, you know, we really do try to have some flexibility, and we've set some aside to ensure that we do not increase our obligation over time, and certainly our interest is beyond not increasing it, we want to diminish our outstanding obligation.
Yeah, and just kind of thinking this through, from my perspective, I agree with you that the obligation is there. We can't get out of the way of that, unless, of course, the discount rate changes and those kinds of things. But, okay, so, thank you.
Supervisor Euler.
You note in the fiscal impact section on page 138 that based on the June 3011 actuarial report, the new hire charge is being reduced to $37,240, down from $52,000. I'm assuming, just by virtue of the calendar, that actuarial review would have been done obviously in advance of CalPERS restating their projected future earnings down to 7.25% on an annualized basis. Do we have any idea what we will be looking at in terms of an impact to our unfunded liability once that is calculated in the 7.25% projected earning as opposed to was 7.5%, I believe?
Yes. Essentially, the CalPERS board voted to reduce the discount rate from 7.75 to 7.5. That only applies to pensions. About 6 months ago, your board adopted a position regarding the OPEB trust, and we adopted a discount rate at that point of 7.61%. That was factored into this actuarial report. That's actually why we didn't know about the $37,000 until the report was done with a new discount rate, because we wanted to make sure we were up to date. This report is only done every 2 years. I will tell you that it has a significant impact to reduce the discount rate on the liabilities unfunded status. And even more significant is whether you look at it from an actuarial perspective where they smooth out gains and losses, or you look at it from a market perspective. So while the pension fund is about 74% funded from an actuarial perspective, it is only 54% funded from a market perspective. And that's one of the reasons why the CalPERS board made the decision that they did. They are the fiduciary agents, and they needed to sort of rein in one of the assumptions.
Okay. So without the board taking any action, the actual impact to departments or the general fund in terms of the cost of the upfront payment was going to be reduced by about a third, regardless of the board doing anything.
That is correct. That's the good news.
Right. So, so when departments were began asking for this payment to be what at the time was a $52,000 payment spread over 2 years, of course $26,000 a year, we're now looking at $37,000 in 1 year. So to keep things consistent, in order, if we were to try to accommodate the department head's desires of reducing the kind of that upfront barrier to entry, it would essentially be the equivalent of splitting the new upfront into 2/3, 1/3 instead of splitting it in half. So rather than the board necessarily saying we will adjust our policy to spread it over 2 years equally, if we said we will adjust our policy to require 2/3 payment in the first year and 1/3 payment in the second year, then from a dollar standpoint, we achieved what the department heads were asking back when it was a $52,000 upfront payment.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Holmes.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. It's always good to refresh our minds about past policies and which way we're headed. I remember when I took office, we didn't have a policy in place, and we had a significant unfunded liability ahead of us. So the board, in a 5-0 vote, gave direction to the CEO's office to work with our finance committee to put some kind of a program in place. And I am very pleased with the way it's gone forward. I feel comfortable that we're going to be able to meet the obligation, particularly in the future when there's other boards going to be sitting here that have to address that issue. So I don't have any problem with keeping the current policy in place. I just want to let the board know that. Thank you.
Teresa, I actually did have just a clarification. One of the things I think I heard you say, and I just wanted to circle back to it, was you said that there might be a different approach depending upon the position or the department. So are you proposing that we look at some sort of hybrid alternative?
Thank you for the question. Actually, no. What I was alluding to is that through the budget process, there's a lot of dialogue with department heads and the CEO analyst. And essentially, they come up with a methodology that will work best for that department. So if there's new revenues that are coming in, for example, the realignment revenue that Graham alluded to for HHS, that money would be targeted to pay for some of these charges. And so it literally, as our interim county executive officer alluded to, it is a department-by-department discussion and analysis. And for those departments that cannot afford it, money has been set aside in the general fund to help augment.
I'm so glad. Thank you for that clarification, because I thought what I had heard was suggest that we might have sort of a two-tier process, and I thought, oh gosh, just do not want to get into that discussion. So thank you.
Sure.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that, I don't have a problem providing the departments the flexibility, if they so desire to do that, as long as we emphasize that, we maintain our current objectives that you pointed out with regards to making sure that our liabilities aren't going up. So if we can accomplish that and provide the departments the flexibility to phase this in, and we don't open the door to, the escalation of staff that, and we do it in a reasoned, calculated fashion, then I'm okay with that.
Supervisor Holmes? Okay. Any questions or concerns from the audience on this? All right, seeing none. Therese, thank you very much for the update. We will now adjourn as the Placer County Board of Supervisors and convene as the Placer County Public Housing Authority and address our 9:30 timed item. Cheryl Davis presenting. And thank you, everyone, for your patience in waiting.
To my item. Good morning, Chair Montgomery, members of the board. I'm Cheryl Davis from your Housing Authority. With me is Nancy Dempsey, your Housing Authority Supervisor. Today we are here to request, it's our annual trip before you, to request that you conduct a public hearing on our annual plan and our updated administrative plan. And after concluding that hearing, if you would approve that plan so we can submit it to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Once we have your approval, we'll be able to secure over $2.2 million in housing subsidies for about 275 families, disabled persons, veterans, and seniors in our community. Excuse me. There are 4 changes to our plans this year from last year that I wanted to enumerate. One, for the second year in a row, your housing authority has been determined a high-performing housing authority by HUD. I'd like to acknowledge Nancy and the work of her staff, Kim Cray, for working very diligently to make sure we exceed our performance standards. 2, last year we had advised you we were awarded 25 vouchers for veterans and their families in our community, and we have successfully filled all those vouchers. We've been keeping our fingers crossed that we could announce, but any day now we are going to be awarded an additional 10 vouchers so that we can continue to help veterans in our community. The third change has to do with the Violence Against Women's Act. We needed to incorporate those provisions into our procedures, which basically prohibit us from denying assistance to or taking away assistance from any person who's a victim of domestic violence. And fourth, our last provision is a minor change to align how we allow medical allowances for prescriptions and medical care of our recipients, align those with federal standards, more like the income tax standards that we're all familiar with. Our plans have been out for a 45-day notice and review period with the public. We've noticed them in our local newspapers. They've been in our local libraries, at our Human Services Office, the Housing Authority Office, and our website. And we have no public comment at this point to report to you. So, concluding our presentation here, unless you have questions for Nancy and I, we would ask that you take the action that's outlined in your board memo to conduct the public hearing, conclude the public hearing, approve our plans for submission.
Okay, I don't see any questions from the board at this point, so I will ask that we conduct a public hearing and receive public comment regarding the Placer County Housing Authority Public Housing Annual Plan for 2012-13 and the Placer County Housing Authority Administrative Plan. So at this time I will open the podium and the discussion for any public comment. Is there anyone who would like to come forward to comment on this? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing.
Madam Chair, I move approval of item 1, A, B, and C on our agenda.
If I may, and this is a technical situation here. On this item that we received in our packet, it says that item C, adopt the attached resolution. And on the agenda item, it just says adopt a resolution, but it's not attached. So where's our legal counsel to talk about the significance of that?
Actually, Supervisor Duran, I can weigh in on that. Your clerk of the board had questioned that also. The certificate that HUD is having us complete, actually, county council staff has opined, is the same thing as a resolution. So by having a resolution and the certificate, we were duplicating action. So my apologies that we did not align my board memo with what is on your blue sheet.
Okay, I'm completely,
Did I make it worse?
I think the
Little bit.
concern is that the resolution is not attached.
Oh, okay.
Is that the concern?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was a confusion about resolution and the certification.
No, the concern is that it says attached resolution, but it's not in our
it's
documents.
not in our packet, so I just want to point that out. If there's a way that we can continue on with the agenda item,
Oh, my apologies.
absent, and the action absent the non-attachment of the resolution, I'd like to make sure that we do everything correctly so we don't have to come back and do this over again.
I have a copy of the certification, if that would help, in our board member. You have it.
And I think council is looking this over for some sort of
That's
judgment.
That's all. I just want to make sure that we can give it its blessing and send
Okay.
it on its
My
way.
apologies. I thought there was confusion about the two documents.
So, looking at the Certificate of Compliance and PHA plans and related regulations, it has built into it the board resolution to accompany the PHA 5-year annual PHA plan. Seems to me that is a resolution, just not in the format that we're used to seeing.
What it is there's some governmental entities, the state, Valerie Flood, County Council's office. There was some confusion on this when we were processing it earlier. Some governmental entities, the state, the feds, they mandate a form of resolution. And it is a resolution. It just isn't the same form of resolution that we use. And this is one of those situations. And so this is a resolution, same force and effect of a resolution, just a different format, mandated by the feds.
Thank you very much, Valerie.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, I believe. Was there any more discussion? Someone seconded that. Okay. Now we have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, thank you. Motion passes. We'll now move on to our 10 o'clock timed, we will now adjourn as the Placer County Public Housing Authority and reconvene as the Placer County Board of Supervisors. We will move on to our 10 o'clock timed item, Public Works North Phase of Auburn Folsom Road Widening Project, acquisition by eminent domain. Ken Graham presenting.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Ken Graham with the Department of Public Works. Today we're asking you to adopt a resolution of necessity for portions of 5 parcels along Auburn Folsom Road in order to widen that road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. The project proposes to, again, widen Auburn Folsom Road from 2 to 4 lanes all the way from Douglas Boulevard to the city of Folsom or the Sacramento County line. They're one and the same. The widening of Auburn Folsom Road has been in the community plan for a very long time. It is a major connection between Interstate 80 and South Placer, Highway 50, the city of Folsom, and El Dorado County. In fact, today there's about 30,000 cars that take that roadway every day. Put that in perspective, typically when a roadway gets to be 16, 17, 18,000 cars per day, we're looking to widen it to 4 lanes. Not all the time, but we're well within that range. In fact, in the future, as the area grows, particularly South Placer, city of Folsom, we anticipate over 40,000 cars per day utilizing that roadway. These are some photos of some current congestion. I think what's important to understand with that about the need of this project is this was just a month ago. So we've already been doing some widening. There is still portions left to be widened, particularly the portion we're going to be talking about today and that we need the right-of-way for. During the whole process, we've had an environmental impact report that your board considered in June of 2004. There were 3 issues that came out that had substantial public discussion as part of that. There was the alignment of the roadway, there were sound wall issues, and median, left turn access types of issues. And all of those even played into the right-of-way acquisition in one way or another. First off, in the alignment, your board considered several options, moving the road over to the east side, moving it to the west side, moving it into the middle. What you chose in the end was an alignment that tried to minimize the impact on private properties. Where you could, through the area by Folsom Lake, the Bureau of Reclamation property, you moved the road over into that side of the road. Where you started having private properties on both sides of the road, you had to start going to the middle. In some areas, particularly at the north end of the project where there was private property on both sides, but one side was more developed, you pushed it over a little bit more to the undeveloped side. So all your decisions on the alignment were based on minimizing impacts to private property, and particularly developed private property. There was also discussion about sound walls, and particularly the EIR for this project showed that there wasn't a sound issue, a sound impact associated with the project. But it did recommend some mitigation that could make the project even better, and that was the placement of an open-grade asphalt that has some noise-reducing properties. Your board did approve and include that as part of the project. Finally, there was also a large discussion about medians. Originally, a lot of people wanted Auburn Folsom to look like Douglas Boulevard, one continuous median going all the way. A lot of concern from people who live there wanted to have left turn access. What your board ended up choosing to do, you chose to have a median on both ends of the roadway, the north end and the south end. You also put a median in the middle where we had what we call a split profile, an area where, because of the topography, we needed to have the one side of the road higher than the other side. Again, and the rest you left open with a two-way left turn lane in order to provide for left turn access onto and off of the roadway. The project was broken into phases. This shows what those phases are. The first phase was the Fuller Drive signal that was completed in 2006. The south phase was completed in 2009, and the middle phase was completed in 2011. We originally actually wanted to start from the north side, but because of some of the difficulties acquiring the right-of-way, we moved to the south and we moved to the north. The funding for the project, it's a $23 million project, substantially funded through Granite Bay traffic impact fees, monies collected from developers in the Granite Bay area. But because of the regional nature of the project, we actually got our partners in the region to participate in the cost of Auburn Folsom through the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority. They're making about an $8 million contribution to make this project happen. In addition to that, we were one of those shovel-ready projects as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And so for our middle phase of the project, we got a contribution from the federal government to make that project happen. And then finally, the San Juan Water District has been a partner through the entire process. They're placing a new water line, increasing water reliability and service through their service area, and to make sure that we are only impacting the public once. We've combined those projects, and they're completely funding the water main portion of the project. So that brings us to the right-of-way needs for the project. We've been very successful on this project in acquiring right-of-way, mutually agreeable. We've, to date, acquired 16 permanent easements, 2 temporary construction easements, and 32 construction permits for the project. Those are done. That's what allowed us to complete everything that we've done to date, plus everything other than the properties that we're going to be discussing here today. That also includes the single largest easement, which was from the Bureau of Reclamation for that property adjacent to Folsom Lake. So this map shows, and it's very small, but the yellow hatched area, you can barely see, just a couple yellow lines cross-hatched. That's the area, the property we need. It's a relatively thin sliver of land across the front of these properties. The first, there we go. Oh. The first ownership group are the Cardosa Properties. There are 2 properties we need to acquire right-of-way from. We need to get 1.35 acres from the 20.3 acres that they own. There was an appraisal done in March of 2005 for about $114,000. That was done in 2005. Long time since that. We had that reappraised here recently last year in May in 2011. The appraisal came in at $220,000. We've met many times since 2005. I'm very happy to say that the Cardosa family has actually proposed a counteroffer that we just received last week. We're in the process of analyzing that. We're hoping to come to your board as soon as possible to have a discussion about that proposal, but that's where we're at today. The next set of properties are from the Landman family, either owned individually by one member of the Landman family or in joint. There are 3 properties. We need approximately 0.34 acres from them over the 6.9 acres they know. And you can see the green lines that show the property lines and how we take that thin strip there at the top. First appraisal with them was in September of 2006 for about $170,000. That offer has kind of changed because the Landman family have obtained during this entire process a third parcel, the parcel in the middle. When we originally started this, there were only the 2 parcels. We had a second appraisal done, July of last year. That appraisal came in at about $85,000. And so I think appears lower essentially because of the drop in the real estate market that's occurred since 2008. We've had a number of discussions with the Landman family also. We're not quite sure. They have not had a firm counteroffer at this point, but I do believe the neighborhood of what they're looking for is about $500,000 plus some additional consideration. Some of that consideration that I've heard, although I'm not positive exactly all that they might want considered, is some sort of wall at their boundary line. So just reiterating the action we're asking for today, adopting a resolution of necessity for the 5 parcels on Auburn Folsom Road for the purpose of widening the road from 2 to 4 lanes. One thing we are asking for your board to amend today on the resolution, page 2 of your resolution, under 3, adding a subsection D, simply clarifying that the acquisition of the property is necessary for the proposed project. I think that's covered a little bit in the whereas, but we want to make sure that's in your board's findings. We don't take this action lightly. We have a track record, I believe, of successful negotiation on this project as well as others. This resolution of necessity will continue to allow us to negotiate with the property owners, finding something that works for everyone. The great value in it, it allows really in the end, if we cannot agree, it allows a third party to be the arbiter of the situation, essentially the court. And they can determine what the appropriate value of the property is. We're committed to paying what that fair market value is. Right now, we just haven't been able to agree on the same number. And in the end, I think the process will protect everyone's rights, the property owner as well as the taxpayer, making sure the proper value is held. So with me, I have Dave Husky from County Council, John Weber, our real property agent, Matt Medill, our property manager, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and, I guess, hear the public testimony.
I don't see any questions for you at this point in time. I do understand that Rob Watson from the San Juan Water District wanted to speak to this. Would you mind coming forward?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Rob Watson with San Juan Water District, and I'm representing San Juan Water District and the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors would like to extend its appreciation to Placer County and to the supervisors for the collaborative approach that's been fostered and facilitated on this project and other projects with the county. This is an example of good government. It's also an example of where these collaborative projects can result in significant savings for the residents of Placer County, which are also San Juan Water District's customers. The Board of Directors for San Juan Water District would like to encourage the supervisors to proceed with this project, the final phase of the Auburn Folsom Road widening, and we thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We have a letter of appreciation that we'd like to submit to the supervisors.
And you want to just hand that to our clerk, sure, please? Thank you.
Happy to answer them.
I see no questions from our board. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to open it up for any public comment. If anyone would like to come forward to talk about this item, this is the time to do so. Please identify yourself for the record. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ditlevson with the Desmond Law Firm in Sacramento, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Landmans. Paul Landman is here today and may comment if there's a need. We did submit a letter to your board dated March 12th where we outlined a few issues that we have with the resolution and reasons why we object. Primarily today I just wanted to come and make sure you all are aware of what the nature was of the county's attempts to acquire the property through a negotiation process. I note that in the materials that you have it says that negotiations have continued since 2006. They're at an impasse. That's not, I wouldn't say that's an entirely accurate or the best characterization of what's occurred. In 2006, October, the Landmans received a first offer from the county. That's about 5.5 years ago now. And they received a revised offer in May 2007. At that time, the owners made a demand for reimbursement of the cost to get an independent appraisal of their property interests. And that's something that the Code of Civil Procedure for California requires that an acquiring agency provide up to $5,000 to provide that appraisal. The Landmans were not able to access that money because the county wanted to require a copy of the appraisal report before they would reimburse. That's not something that's the county's entitled to in order to make that reimbursement. There's a code section, 1263.025, that says you need to show you have a qualified appraiser, certified, et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of set things off in a negative tone. The Landmans did hire an appraiser, and they did obtain a preliminary opinion. And in late 2008, they attempted to restart negotiations with the county. But they were sort of rebuked in that because they wouldn't share their appraisal report, they weren't able to get very far with the county. Now, the reason why you wouldn't share your appraisal report is because if you end up in a situation like this, where you're facing litigation, we have rules of evidence and protections for property owners to make sure that there's a level playing field for them in the event that they do end up in litigation. After that, that time in 2008, there's really been nothing happening. The Landmans couldn't get any traction with the county, so 3+ years later, it wasn't until May of 2011 that they were contacted again. And it wasn't until, I think, February 15th of this year that they received a new offer. All of a sudden, there was a new appraisal that the county had done, and you heard from your staff that there was a significant drop in value in that appraisal. And I think when you account for the nature of the take, you're looking at a 75% drop in that offer, in the value that was appraised. 6 days later, they get a notice saying that you're going to consider having this resolution of necessity hearing, and here we are today. To say that there has been a good faith effort to negotiate, I think would be inaccurate. To present them at this last moment, because all of a sudden you're at a need to get the project moving again with such a substantially lower offer and no real opportunity to negotiate, very unfair. Unreasonable conduct is what we would say that is. That there's been an unreasonable delay by county, and that has something to do with the reason why we're looking at such a significantly lowered valuation. And so we wanted to come here today, make you aware of that, and speak on the item, let you know of that objection.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, I'm a little bit shocked at what you're saying here. This has gone on since 2006. It's now 2012. There's probably a lot of reasons why that offer is not what it is, and it's probably not based on anything having to do with the county. The fact of the matter is that this project has been in place for a number of years. As you've heard our planning department director talk about it, there's been regional cooperation. The train was coming down the tracks, and now we're getting to the bottom and to the end of the track. So coming here and telling us that we've been unreasonable in this process doesn't really carry a whole lot of water with me. I heard in your discussion, the county made 2 offers. Part of facilitating a negotiation is being able to provide some good faith. And I would think that good faith would be the appraisal itself. And then we come out and provide another at our own expense and appraise it on our own dime, and we're still getting nowhere. That's all I've got to say about it.
If I may have an opportunity to respond.
Any other questions from the board? I have a question. Ken, can you tell me, I don't know if this is proprietary information, but what was the offer in 2006 and what was the offer in May of 2008?
Now, I'm not sure about 2008, but in 2006, the appraisal, and our appraisal usually, our offer follows the appraisal. And I got to put a little bit different twist on there because during the time of this appraisal, they acquired a third property, and so it kind of changed, so there could be a little confusion. But for the 3 properties, about $171,000.
In 2006?
In 2006. In 2011, last year, when we had it reappraised, it came in at about $85,000.
And the May 2008, do we have a figure? Was there an appraisal in May 2008?
I don't believe there was. Okay. There may have been some discussions going on at that time, but there was not an appraisal by us. Then that maybe perhaps somebody else.
I'm sorry, you had indicated that in May 2008 there was what you characterized as a second offer.
Oh, let me be clear. The Landmans hired an appraiser, and they did have a valuation done of their property, or at least a preliminary assessment by an appraiser. And what they attempted to do was talk to the county about some numbers and about some data. They didn't have an appraisal report to share.
That May 2008 date that you refer to
That's what I'm referring to.
Was not an offer.
No, that was...
And that was the appraisal that the Landmans had that they did not share with the county?
Correct, the actual appraisal report.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come forward and comment on this item?
Yes, I'm Paul Landman, and I'm representing the 3 properties that we're discussing. The young lady covered everything pretty well from our point of view. The last discussion that we had with the county prior to this new appraisal was at our attorney's office, and John Weber was there. And during the course of the conversation, the exception was made to the fact that they had not addressed all the issues on that appraisal that were required by California law. And John, to the best of my recollection, said, yes, I know, and he got up and left. Just to add to the story, she covered everything else pretty good. At this point, we've talked with the county since we had the last mention of this meeting a couple of weeks ago. We haven't made any progress, but we certainly are willing to continue to talk. The one thing that I would like for you to consider, which he had brought up, was I have from the beginning requested that they consider a sound and privacy wall, because they're taking all the vegetation off the front of our property, and which allowed for us to have a large amount of privacy, and it also cushioned the sound. And they have always said there isn't going to be a wall. Well, in addition to that, the master plan of Granite Bay Community right across the street from us has a high-density housing subdivision that will eventually go in, and they're going to put a sound wall in, which will ricochet all the sound off of Auburn Folsom Road towards our property. So we would like for you to consider that point, because it is, to us, a very valid and needful thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Euler.
Yeah, Mr. Landman, if I may, just briefly. Just want to make sure that we have everything clear here. The county's original offer based off the original appraisal was approximately $170,000. Is that correct?
I don't remember the figure exactly. I should know that, but somewhere in that vicinity. I was thinking it was a little higher than that, but I know after we bought the third property, they reevaluated everything, because that became part of the what do they call that? where you go back and look at, recent sales. So,
So we went from approximately 170 in '06. Your counter to the county was $500,000 plus a sound wall when?
pardon?
When did you make your counter to the county of $500,000 plus a sound wall?
Well, that was a figure that we discussed recently, a week ago, 10 days ago, and we had discussed it very informally in some months past, way back, maybe clear back to the point where we had that meeting.
Okay.
But yes, that's based on our appraisal and the expenses that we've had up to this point of trying to get this all done.
Okay. So is the county willing to show you our appraisal? Willing to share our appraisal with you? Have you asked for a copy of our appraisal? Has it been provided to you? Both the first one that had the value at approximately 170 and the second one that had the value closer to 80?
Yes.
Okay. And that reduction in value from 2006, roughly the height of the market, to today is fairly consistent with what we've seen in Granite Bay in terms of overall residential property prices. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I haven't done any research myself, but I can tell you that if we were going to sell our land, we would not choose this particular time to do it. And we are being forced to sell our land. I know that the property values will come back just as well as you do, and everybody on the board will. And it may take a year or two or maybe 5, but we're going to be back to where we were.
At roughly 170,000.
Well, that's what they offered, but again, that isn't.
Based on an appraisal which we shared.
Pardon?
Based on an appraisal which we've shared.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why, in the course of these negotiations, you haven't been willing to share an appraisal that you had done?
On advice of my counsel, he said to keep those particular figures. He said it would be fine to talk in general terms.
You understand why it makes it a little tough to quote-unquote negotiate when only one side is willing to actually show numbers that are market-based?
I said I'm willing to continue to talk too.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And to be clear, Ken, if you could just clarify this for me. The action that the board may be taking here today does not preclude ongoing discussions and negotiations. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
So the discussions that you would want to continue having can continue if the board does take this action today?
I'm willing to continue to discuss, as is my wife.
Okay. But just understand that if the board takes this action today, you can continue to have those
I
discussions.
understand that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak to this?
Yeah, good morning. I was going to speak on the 3 properties. I'm speaking on the larger piece. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with the Board of Supervisors.
Would you identify yourself
I'm
for the
sorry.
record, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, my name is Tony Cardoso, and my wife and I own the property at 8989 Auburn Folsom and 9005 Auburn Folsom Road, depicted on the screen there. Now, we've owned these properties for many years and waiting for the right time to develop the property. We want to do a development, that would benefit the community and benefit Granite Bay. We spend much time and effort and money with the planning and architectural and environmental and much expense going on these past handful of years. I have a few points of interest on this resolution of necessity. Number one, which is pretty obvious. It's a public use, definitely in need of this widening. And it appears to be environmentally compliant with all the rules. Everything's done right. And number 3, the county will be negotiating in good faith, and we have what they call, the fair market value for the property being taken. Now, we've been meeting with Supervisor Euler, Ken Graham, John, for the past 5-6 years. And the meetings have always been positive. We've always left with a good feeling and a situation where we can work together and resolve the situation. Pretty obviously that property values have changed dramatically in the 5-6 years. We are not sellers of real estate at this time, especially at today's values. Now, with the recent proposal with the county, it appears that the county will be taking a fair and equitable position at this time. I hereby approve the taking of our land and agree with this resolution of necessity. That's my comment for now.
Thank you, Mr. Cardosa. Thank you very much. Anything else from the board? Thank you, sir.
Is that it then? All right, thank you very much.
We appreciate your time today. Any other comment on this item? Anyone else? Now's your opportunity. Okay, seeing none, I will bring this back to the board. We're being asked here to adopt a resolution of necessity to acquire the real property as discussed. And Tony, do you need to give us any guidance on how to move this forward? Okay. We'll need a motion on this, and then we will need a second, and this will require a roll call. Ken, was there anything else you wanted to add before we move forward?
Just as a clarification for the amendment of the resolution of necessity to include 3D, the acquisition of the property is necessary for the proposed project.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I first of all want to thank Tony for showing up today and for working with me and Ken over the years to move this project forward. Extend the offer to Mr. Landman to continue to sit down and discuss and try to come to an adequate resolution. But the Granite Bay community, as well as the surrounding communities of Folsom, Roseville, Rockland, have spoken loudly and clearly through our Municipal Advisory Council, Roseville and Rockland being willing through Sparta to contribute $8 million to this project. This is an important project in our area, and we can no longer afford the kinds of delays that we've incurred to get this project done. I believe it is necessary for us to take this step at this point in order to continue this project for our region's good, and therefore I would move approval excuse me, of the resolution of necessity as amended with item 3D, noting that the acquisition of the property is necessary for the proposed project.
I will second that motion, and I will also say that as a practicing attorney myself, understanding how important property rights are in general and how important property rights are to this county and the residents within this county. If I thought for a second that we did something out of the ordinary here, I wouldn't be in support of this. But having taken a look at the documentation here, having full confidence in our staff to do the background and to do what they need to do in order to assist in the acquisition of this property, I'm confident that we're doing the right thing here. Thank you.
And may we have a roll call, please?
Euler, Duran, Wygant, Holmes, Montgomery.
Yes. Thank you. At this time, we will move to our 10:15 timed item. Item 3 on our agenda, Public Works funding application for the Kings Beach Commercial Core Improvement Project Phase 2 and an in-lieu parking fee study for Kings Beach and Tahoe City. Peter Kratz presenting.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Happy to be here today on this item. With this item, actions for your consideration today, again, for the record, Peter Kratz with Public Works. Actions for your consideration today relate to 2 state-level grant opportunities, as stated in the agenda item. These actions include conduct a public hearing and adopt a resolution to submit up to a $1.5 million Community Development Block Grant public improvement application and up to $100,000 to study an in-lieu parking fee program through a set-aside application for a planning and technical assistance grant, and as part of resolution adoption, approve the future execution of a grant agreement by the Public Works Director or his designee, and any required amendments from the public improvement and set-aside allocations of the State of California CDBG program. The public improvement grant request is related to construction of the Kings Beach Commercial Core Improvement Project, and specifically Phase 2 of that project, which consists of improvements in the grid or county roads portion of the project, such as sidewalks to connect the downtown core with the residential area, also known as the Fish and Mammal Streets. In addition, the grant can cover neighborhood traffic calming devices and water quality improvements proposed in the grid. The planning grant equates to $100,000 and is requested for an in-lieu parking fee study for the communities of Kings Beach and Tahoe City. This is an issue that the county has attempted to address in the past, and we believe it's still relevant to consider maturing of a tool that could be available for future development and redevelopment projects in the North Shore communities, based on the fact that in that part of our world, parking is at a premium and lot sizes are small. This would be a study that would allow, again, give a tool to folks, for developers, if they can't do all their parking on site, they can pay a fee for future public parking lots to be built in the area. Fiscally, the $1.5 million construction grant would cover the funding shortfall that still exists for the Kings Beach Commercial Core Improvement Project. This and other funding pursuits that we're currently in the middle of hope to fill the construction funding gap for that project by year's end. In order to receive the planning funding for the parking study of the $100,000, 5% needs to be a local match contribution, which would stem from previously committed North Lake Tahoe Resort Association funding. As required by the CDBG program, 2 public hearings are required and must be properly noticed 10 days in advance of each hearing. The hearings must also be 30 days apart, and the first one was held over 30 days ago. The second one is being asked to be conducted by your board today. The hearings were noticed in the Sierra Sun, Tahoe World, and Auburn Journal. Environmentally, the Kings Beach project has received state, federal, and Tahoe Regional Planning Agency environmental document approvals, and the parking study is not a project and as such is exempt from CEQA. There is negligible fiscal impact to the county through this grant application effort. If successful, the department will budget the appropriate amount of matching funds not to exceed $5,000 and program the grant funding in the appropriate fiscal year budget or budgets for its intended use. So in final, formal request for your board is to conduct a public hearing as previously discussed to solicit any comments on the matter and then consider approval of the item and resolution before you. Thanks for your time.
I don't see any questions or comments. I have a couple of things that I just wanted to clarify. You did conduct a public hearing earlier, and that was held in Tahoe?
It actually was held down here.
It was
It's
held
allowed to be held down here. I know
Okay.
that sounds a little bit, this is a project up in Tahoe, but based on the grant requirements, we were able to hold it down here.
Okay. Will there be an opportunity for the public in the Tahoe area as we move forward with the actual study, if this item gets approved today, to participate in that?
Definitely. That's one of those things where if the grant award is made to us, it will be a process where we'll probably go to North Tahoe Advisory Council at least once to talk to the public about this. As I said in this action item, or in this item, we went here historically as a department, looking at it. It didn't get a lot of traction in the past. We definitely will do a lot of public outreach again on this item or this issue. Again, thinking that it is a good tool, making sure that people realize it's not just a fallback place to go for folks to say, oh, I'm going to just overdevelop my site because I don't have to worry about the parking ordinance anymore. The parking ordinance is still first and foremost, but it gives them a secondary tool to look to.
Okay.
help them.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from the board? No? Okay. At this point, then, I will open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone who would like to come forward and speak to this item? All right. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
All right. We are just shy of 11 o'clock, so we will move on to our next department item, which is Facilities Services, Adult System of Care, Planning Project 4878. Joel Swift presenting.
Good morning, Chair Montgomery and members of the board. Again, Joel Swift, Deputy Director of Facility Services. I have with me as well today Maureen Bauman from Adult System of Care and Jim Ganley from HHS and Doug Hawk, our staff architect. This item is a request for your board to initiate a capital project for Adult System of Care for planning project number 4878 and approve a budget revision appropriating $200,000 from HHS ASOC to the project. The proposed project will provide programming, site selection, and support for relocation of psychiatric services provided by Placer County. The county is mandated by State of California to provide psychiatric emergency services, including hospitalization in acute care hospital. And since September of 2000, the county's Health and Human Services, ASOC, has operated a 16-bed psychiatric healthcare facility and 16 short-term crisis residential treatment service at a leased facility at 101 Kirby Hills Drive in Roseville. In addition to ASOC's occupancy, the Children's System of Care and the Board of Supervisors also occupy office space in this site. The current lease agreement expires August 31st of 2013 with a potential one potential 2-year future option to extend through August 31st of 2015. However, the site is ongoing some ownership changes, and we're looking at potential strategies for where we would operate this operation. Could be at the current facility for portions of it, could be construction of a new facility, leasing a facility, or modifications to the current service delivery method. Really, any one of these options for this operation require determining the appropriate space needs for the operation. So in order to proceed with such a plan, any of these plans, funding is needed to fund the project management professional services of firms with the capacity and the expertise to provide such a plan. Our Capital Improvements Division, Doug Hawk, has been involved with negotiating with a contract with Inova Nexus, who is one of our architectural firms on contract, to provide those preliminary space needs for the ASOC program at Kirby Hills, as well as to look at the Auburn portion of this work. This architectural firm is currently performing a similar study for the Children's System of Care. And these studies would be to develop those programming documentation of the three main components, the PUF, the CRT, and the office space, develop the adjacency diagrams, room data sheets, all of the information that we then could use to solicit whatever solution we would take on-site elsewhere. Site alternatives could be studied through this part of the study. And at some point, depending on which direction we take, there may be some additional funding requests. The actual contract, the value of the contract with Inova Nexus is just barely over $20,000 and would be signed by your purchasing manager. But in order to proceed with the plan, we need to create a capital project for this programming effort and to approve the budget revision appropriating $200,000 from the HHS ASOC to the planning project. And with that, if there's any questions from your board, feel free to answer them.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, Joel, is the 20,000, it's subsumed into the 200?
Absolutely, that's a component of it, yes.
Okay, I see no other questions from the board. Any members of the audience want to comment on this item or have any questions? All right, seeing none, all right, this is, we're being asked to create a capital project and to approve a budget revision, so this is a roll call.
Okay. Holmes? Aye. Duran? Yes. Wygant? Bueller?
He's out of the room.
Sorry. Montgomery?
Yes. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Item 7B, South Placer Adult Corrections Facility, Project 4869. And then we will move on to item C, because I see a number of folks here from the city of Colfax, and we'll get to our 11 o'clock timed item after item C.
Very good. Thank you. I have with me as well today Dennis Salter, our senior architect, who negotiated this particular contract, as well as representative from CGL Kitchell, Sean Bondar. This action is a follow-up on previous direction from your board in December of last year to proceed with an RFP process. Specifically, the action is to approve an agreement with CGL Kitchell Facility Management, LLC, for professional services for testing and operation of the South Placer Adult Correction Facility during this warranty phase in the amount of $475,000, and authorize the chair of the Board of Supervisors to execute said agreement. And also the second item is to approve a budget revision appropriating $500,000 from Project 4907 miscellaneous county projects to Project 4869 for the SPAC warranty phase. As I mentioned back in December, we initiated the RFP process, and that has now been completed. Staff has negotiated the contract with the successful proposer, CGL Kitchell Facilities Management. That name, Carter Global Lee, is the CGL in that, and they have 19 years of experience nationwide of providing just these types of services for criminal justice facilities. And the Kitchell portion has a vast amount of criminal justice construction management experience as well. Their team has literally millions of square feet of correctional facilities that they've worked with this type of contract. The negotiated contract value is composed of $429,409.52 of base services, with the remainder being additional services that we anticipate we may need during transition as needed, or corrective maintenance that might be outside the warranty services. And ultimately, this is all a function of us completing the construction project and not truly occupying it during the critical warranty period. And until there is an operational plan and timeline, this contract fits the void where the facility will be having to go through its testing, continued operation of all the basic systems of any building, but in particular the specialized detention systems that we really want to put to the test, and work closely with the sheriff's office to set up their operations plan during this whole phase. In addition, what the CGL Kitchell team brings is they're setting up this brand new facility with looking forward for the long-term use by the county in terms of barcoding key equipment, setting up a computerized maintenance management system, and really setting up a very organized system for managing this facility from day one. It is also anticipated that this will complement our other contracts with fire alarm, generators, building automation systems, and all the other components that we have in a facility. I think it's also important to note that no current county staff will be displaced by the work performed during this contract. It does include options subject to further action by your Board of Supervisors for extension of the duration and scope, and all of this depending on the key discussion and decisions that will come forward in terms of when and how the operation of the facility will start. Again, this provides us a key component in the project closeout and commissioning process, and really provides us with a smooth transitioning of the facility. And in order to proceed, we request your board approve this agreement, and we certainly would like to hear any comments you have on that.
Supervisor Duran, your light is on.
Yes. Thank you, Joel, for bringing this forward. Just a couple of comments. When I first read this, and I know that when we talked about this, when I saw Kitchell, I was like, okay, Kitchell's now doing work with correctional facilities. I know Kitchell, and I've worked with Kitchell. I've been on the other side of many Kitchell projects, so I was a little bit surprised to see that. But I've done a little bit of the research that you talked about on CGL, and actually quite pleased and surprised that we've got such a good business here that not only has connections here in the United States, but it appears that they've got ventures in Asia as well as Latin America. We should probably sit down and have a cup of coffee about that. But I'm real confident that this is a good partner here to help us get through the early stages of our warranty phase and testing, which can be quite daunting. And I have had a couple of folks come and ask me why we're not using our own staff and putting our own staff into this position and train them for the for the testing. If we were rolling out the opening of the jail right now, then that may be a consideration for me. But I'm fully confident that by providing the opportunity to have this joint venture handle that, and while we develop the plan to do what we need to do with the jail, it's probably the most prudent and cost-effective way to do that, because it is quite an interesting, undertaking to test all of the operations and all of the machinery and all of that prior to opening. So that's all I've got.
Thank you.
I see no other questions from the board. Anyone in the audience want to comment on this or have any questions? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. What's the pleasure of the board? Okay, this will require a roll call since this is a budget revision.
Duran.
Yes.
Wygant. Yes. Holmes. Yes. Bueller. Montgomery.
Yes. All right, we will now move on to item 7C, also facility services, surplus property transfer, Colfax Courthouse. And you're clearly not Jim Durfee.
No, not today, thanks. I'm Mark Rideout, Facility Services. I have Suzanne Roberts from the Colfax City Council's in the audience, as is Bruce Kranz, the mayor of Colfax. Several actions today to...
City manager.
Not nervous.
I don't know if that was, an improvement or a demotion.
Cities, counties. So to divest the county of the Colfax Courthouse, we're asking your board to take several actions today. It's at 10 Culver Street in Colfax, and it's about a 0.16 acre property. We're asking that you delegate authority to the Director of Facility Services to execute the purchase and sale agreement to conclude the sale for $1 to the City of Colfax based on the material terms that are in your package today, and then also adopt a resolution authorizing the Director to take any actions that are necessary to conclude this transaction. It's about a 2,700 square foot building that was constructed in the 1960s. The county operated as a courthouse until 2008, when the court transfer agreements moved those operations to the Bill Santucci Justice Center, and since that time it's been a vacant building. We were talking with Colfax over the last couple of years about the property, and recently they confirmed their interest in acquiring it. They have a variety of interesting educational, health, and recreational programs that they'd like to program into that, and they're on the verge of applying for a community development block grant. Actually, a week from Friday is the application deadline, and their council's meeting tomorrow night to consider this. They are interested in acquiring the property regardless of being successful in this round of the grant application. There are some benefits also to the county. We have this vacant facility that we found that the roof failed a couple years ago and created some problems inside for us. And even with a vacant building, it's costing $6,000 a year for water meter connection charges and different maintenance costs. Very specialized building. It would be expensive to convert it to any use that we might have in the future, and we really don't have anything programmed for the county's functions up there. We looked at selling it with the market in Colfax, it being disassociated from the commercial core. Again, the specialized use, it really wouldn't generate very much revenue for the county, and this is really kind of win-win for both us and the city up there. There are some details in the material terms that you might see that if there were underground storage tanks that the county placed as part of our operation, we'd remain liable to take care of those, but essentially aside from that, the city's interested in taking it as is. So again, we recommend that your board approve this transaction, and I don't know if you'd like to speak. Thank you.
I don't see any questions from the board. Is there anyone who'd like to come forward and comment on this? Bruce? Suzanne?
Thank you. Suzanne Roberts, Colfax City Council member. And I just want to say that this is a great example of partnership between city and county, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to take this building and expand on some community involvement. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'm kind of sorry Jim isn't here today because I really wanted to thank him for this. This is something that he and I discussed probably 2.5, almost 3 years ago. We just started talking about what facilities were sitting empty and could they have better purposes for the community, whether it's the city of Colfax or the county of Placer. In this case, it was just so obvious that this was something that would be a real asset to the city if the city were able to take it over. And Jim has worked diligently with the city to make sure that we can move this process forward. We did take this to the WACMAC, which was supportive of this. They see that there are benefits to the city as well as to local county residents. And I just think, as Suzanne said, this is a terrific example of governments working well together. We don't often have examples of that, and so I think it's really important to point them out when we do have them. So thank you very much for all your work on this. Greatly appreciated. Any other comments, questions from our board? Will of the board? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, at this point, we'll move to our 11 o'clock timed item, which is Facilities Services, Bell Garden Apartments Relocation Plan Adoption. And you didn't move.
No, slightly. Mark Rideout, Facility Services. This is a continuance that we're asking again. Back in January, we came to your board and requested adoption of the relocation plan for the Bell Garden Apartments. And then we were back in February with a continuance. We are still making progress with Legal Services of Northern California. We're confident that a resolution is forthcoming, but we are asking continuance to an indefinite date, just so that we can be more efficient in coming back with the ultimate resolution of this issue.
Okay. I see no questions on this. Do we have a motion to continue? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item B.
This is an amendment to the A&G Development Company's lease. We were talking with them back in January about their management of the property, and they were not certain they wanted to go into a term, and they've been on month to month since they took over the property in 1998. They've subsequently reconsidered, and they are willing to manage the property while we transition folks out of the housing. They're looking at June 30 as being the end date of their lease. Recognizing that there are some economies with people moving out and ongoing expenses, we've negotiated that once 10 units become vacant, the 11th unit, the county will begin paying them $3,000 a month. We're anticipating this is a 3-month process, so it's about $9,000 of expense. And there are currently 5 units vacant. And really, we see this as a benefit to the residents because they've been working with them since 1998 as the property manager, having them there through the transition phase. We think it'll be a good way to go, actually. So we would request your board's approval of this amendment to the A&G Development Company lease.
I see nothing from the board. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to comment on this? Seeing none, pleasure of the board. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item 8, Health and Human Services, Children's System of Care, Roseville Joint Union High School District, and Human Services mid-year budget revisions.
Good morning, Chairwoman Montgomery, members of the board. Richard Connect with the Children's System of Care. Last July, your board authorized and supported an agreement with the Placer County Office of Education to distribute to school districts categorical state mental health dollars to serve Placer students with emotional or behavioral challenges. Today's request allows Roseville Joint Unified to also access these transitional state dollars. Historically, under AB 3632, the County Mental Health Authority has been the mandated provider of such services. Over the years, more than 6,000 Placer students have been served through a collaborative, seamless, and cost-effective model here. Beginning in July of this year, coming forward, the state has removed these funds from county budgets and likewise removed the mandate to collaboratively deliver services. As part of a one-year plan transition and with the support of local special education authorities, CSOC will reimburse Roseville Joint Unified their allocated percentage of these state funds up to $350,953. A budget revision is included as item B, and I would request your approval of both items, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
I see no questions. Anyone in the audience? Seeing none, pleasure of the board. All those. This is a roll call.
Holmes? Duran? Wygant? Euler? Montgomery?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8B, Human Services mid-year budget revisions. Cheryl Davis presenting.
Yes, hello again. Cheryl Davis from your Human Services Division, and I'll be tag teaming with Graham Knaus on this item. There's 2 actions. Mine is requesting your approval of the mid-year budget revision to recognize an additional $1.1 million in Medi-Cal funding. As you know, our caseload for medical assistance has increased significantly due to the economic downturn. We have been able to leverage our resources so that we can maximize federal dollars so that we do not have to use county resources for the increased service delivery. The $1.1 million is coming in this fiscal year, and there's no county general fund match required to be able to draw down those funds. Now to Graham.
If you recall back in 2011-12 in developing the budget, there was a technical accounting change that was made related to how realignment revenues were budgeted within HHS. After that action was taken, the state then came in and approved a 2011 realignment, which had a different approach related to our budget locally. So to resolve that, this budget revision also includes changes to the way that realignment is budgeted in HHS for both the 1991 realignment and the 2011 realignment to ensure that we have one local consistent approach to how we budget realignment revenue within the county. So that part of it is factored in and removes what was a technical distortion related to the general fund budget in 11-12. So this will resolve that issue as well as part of this revision.
I see no questions from the board. Pleasure of the board. All the roll call.
Holmes. Duran. Wygant. Euler. Montgomery.
Yes. All right. We will now move into closed session. Tony.
The board will go into closed session and take up the items on page 4, item number 9. There's one existing litigation matter, the potential of 2 initiation of litigation, 1 potential significant exposure to litigation. There will also be a discussion of labor discussions regarding the PPEO negotiations. And then finally, the board will continue its review of applicants for the county executive officer position, which it started last Tuesday. We'll report back sometime, hopefully today. Today.
We will report back sometime today.